Okay, welcome to the Gate HD podcast. My name is Josh, and we have here Pastor Zach. This is our weekly podcast, but you'll probably notice that we're wearing the same clothes as last episode.
It's our uniforms.
Yeah.
So we're gonna wear every time.
Well, the condensed time frames and being mindful of the rest of the week and things that need to get done, we want to be able to get some podcasts done, as many done during some downtime, and then distribute those accordingly each week. And so, so if you're asking yourself that, that's your answer, and that's what's going on.
It's because we're poor and we don't make a lot of money,
Dirt
and
poor.
so we don't have a lot of clothes.
Yeah, we actually exchange clothes.
Yeah. So, alright, this is getting weird. Alright.
Okay. So this podcast, we're going to be discussing our most recent Sunday service message that was given to us by Pastor Jade Duncan out of Antioch Church in Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
My hometown, actually.
Really?
Well, I was born in Loveland, Colorado, yeah.
Huh.
All my family, they're out there.
Yeah. That's cool.
Maybe I feel a calling out there. No, I'm kidding.
Well, we'll talk about the sermon and see how that goes. So, yeah.
Okay, so I have had little to no interaction with Pastor Jade, but Zach has. I've talked to him once, maybe twice, and I'll share a little bit of my experience with him, but I'll pass it off over to Zach to give us a breakdown of who Pastor Jade is.
Yeah, Pastor Jade. So I've just gotten to know him a little bit through the CAM USA conference, which happened in April-ish. I always say ish. It's the room for error.
Get out of jail free card.
Yeah, so April-ish. And I got to hang out with him a little bit there. He brought his worship leader out here as well at that time. He was a pretty cool dude. And we played ball together, kind of hung out a little bit. And then I spent a little bit of time. He brought his wife and his kids out this time, which was pretty awesome. He has 4 kids, twin boys, like you.
Mm-hmm.
So another living the dream. And Pastor Jay's just an awesome dude. His word at the CAM USA conference was one of those like life-changing sermons to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll share a little bit about that real quick. Obviously, I was raised more of the charismatic, borderline Pentecostal type during the 90s renewal and everything. But I still kind of have a hard time with that sometimes, which is kind of weird because I was raised in it. But the way my mind works, I'm just like, I love theology and I want to make sense of everything, even though it's kind of a contradiction to make sense of things.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we're like following a guy who says, "Eat my flesh and drink my blood." So so it's kind of like a weird thing I have. And so his sermon for me, and I believe in healings, and I believe in tongues and prophecy and all this crazy stuff. I just like I like to analyze things, and I want to read it, and I want to study it, and all these kind of things. And so his sermon at CAM USA just rocked me. I was like, yeah, dude, you're really good at this part, and you're really lacking on this part. So let's put the two together. Because what he talked about is having Holy Spirit and the Word be a combination. And it was just absolutely mind-blowing. One of the greatest sermons I ever heard. And he's just a cool guy.
Yeah.
Like the way he communicates and carries himself, like his love is very infectious. Like you can tell he cares about you, and he likes to have fun. We went and played basketball at my old high school with him and some buddies, and he's actually a really good basketball player, so that's always a plus for me. I know you love sports too.
Absolutely love the sports.
That's sarcasm. But Pastor Jay's just a great guy, man. Got to meet his wife Christy and his kids and hang out with them, and just the things they're doing in Colorado are really cool. And so that's really my experience. And so Sunday he taught again at the church, and I have a good feeling he's probably going to teach a lot more at our church because of the way that people responded and what he had to say. And very timely word, I think, for our congregations.
Yeah,
and,
unbelievably.
Probably a timely word just for the global church overall,
Right.
the way that the church is going in our world. And so, but I just love the guy and the brief time I've had with him, and truly a man of God. He inherited Dutch Sheets' church, and so I think a lot of people who probably probably know Dutch Sheets and have heard of him. And so, but yeah, and they're doing great things in Colorado, and so yeah, so that's all I got to say about my interaction with him.
Yeah, if you don't know who Dutch Sheets is, maybe you've heard of Damon Thompson or Karen Wheaton out at the Ramp in Alabama. There's this circle of individuals, and Dutch Sheets is one of the biggest voices really in church today, regardless of what side you reside in. He's just a massive voice, and he is poured into Jay Duncan, and you see the fruits of that. And so his communicating abilities, his heart, like you said, is infectious, and just what the Lord puts on his heart and the gifts that he has, there's just this wonderful mixture that's delivered to you when you're sitting and just dialoguing with him in person, or just sitting and receiving a message that the Lord's put on his heart.
Yeah.
So yeah, really good guy. And I think from the KMUSA message, it was perfect, because I know for the Gate we have a melting pot of not just outside culture, but church culture also, and different theological slants. And we have one side that's very charismatic, almost Pentecostal, if not they more lean in that direction. We have Word of Faith folks, and we have Reformed, hard crunching, old school Baptist folks, and it's really a miracle in and of itself that we're not divided in that, and that we are united, and it's a beautiful thing. But I think it's been this elephant in the room that no one's really talked about, and there's not really much conversation. We just kind of operate with it there, and Jade just brought such a powerful message in that there is this sweet marriage between word and spirit, and how we need to balance those things. And I'd heard this communicated before. It was something on my heart. I'm not as gifted in communicating things like these guys are. I have the thoughts, I just don't know how to present them, and Jade did a wonderful job. I had heard it given before by a worship leader, surprisingly, but he did not communicate it in the way that Pastor Jade did, and so I'm very thankful that he was able to do that, and it came at a perfect time. So yeah, we'll hop into this most recent sermon that was given to us by him, and I'll let Pastor Zach take over.
Yeah, well, he taught from Genesis 26, 1-6, and he talked about famine and desert, and Isaac was in a time of famine, and Isaac, okay. And he talked about Isaac, and then how the scripture doesn't really say, but Isaac was probably leaning on going to Egypt,
right?
Because that would have been the place that had supplies and had food and was prepared. And God actually called Isaac to stay in the desert,
right?
Which to us seems like craziness, I think. Like, why would God leave him there or have him stay there? And so all this is going on during famine. And so this is what Pastor Jade talked about. And he talked about, like, really what happens when you stay and reap in the famine.
Yeah.
And so, so your thoughts on this? I know there's a lot of thoughts. I don't really have any organized thoughts. So do you want to speak to something real quick?
Yeah. I think one of the major points that he had made was to not uproot and leave where you're currently at. Because again, like last podcast, if we really believe what we believe in the Bible, that God is sovereign and that there are things that we have been appointed to, and those been appointed over us, we have an obligation to the community that we've been planted in. I'm not in the high desert by coincidence. I don't believe in coincidence. I believe that there is the providential hand of God that has moved us to be here. And while there's this internal leap in my flesh, really, to go out, because there's really nothing binding us here to stay in the desert. I grew up here, and there is this desire to go and see what else is out there. That's kind of the culture that we've all been raised in, is this anticipation for the unknown. There's this excitement, but the reality is if we can't see the beauty here, we're not going to be able to see the beauty anywhere else. And so I was recently having a conversation with a guy who had been contemplating, now guilty. I've certainly had those thoughts, entertained those thoughts, and even looked up real estate in different countries, different states, to see what our options were. And in reality, that's not a biblical premise. But again, back to this conversation I was having with the individual, we both had started attending the Gate maybe about 7-8 years ago. And the majority of people that were here at the time had very influential voices, and they really set a tone for all of us that it's okay to leave. It's okay to go on the journey. But in reality, look, you can do those things. I'm not against you leaving and God calling you to be somewhere else. We are Ascending Church. Absolutely. I won't deny that. But I think that we have a follower's mentality, is that when someone who we find influential and impactful in our lives, we want to follow them and what they're doing, maybe not necessarily location, but just follow suit and just leave too, for really no reason, really petty issues, to be honest. Yeah. And so back to the message of what Pastor Jade was bringing is, he was saying there's going to be this draw to go to what's exciting. There are economies outside of California. California is not thriving right now. There are people who are hurting financially. And so there are other economies like Texas and the Midwest predominantly right now, where they are just, they're flourishing. And I can see where there's this desire, especially as men, because there's this weight of responsibility financially to care for our families. Yeah. And so when we're failing at that, there is a guilt and shame that rests on our shoulders that is almost unbearable. And so that leads our brain to go into all kinds of places that they shouldn't be going. And what it should be doing is really pushing us deeper into and pressing into our relationship with the Lord and really trusting Him. And so I'll leave it at that if you have any ideas and thoughts.
No, I think that's really good, and because what Pastor Jade was talking about is just staying and sowing in the famine, because there's people who, I mean, this happens at every church. It's not just the Gate Church. Absolutely. But it happens in every church, to where people leave, and granted, some leave for really good reasons, which is fine, and they leave the right way.
Right, absolutely.
That's happened several times. I can think of several that, don't need a name. And then there's several, the opposite, who either follow for really non-biblical reasons, or just because everybody else is moving, so why don't we move too? And one thing Pastor Jade said that I really liked is to stop having this temporary mindset and have a permanent mindset.
Absolutely.
No matter really where you're at. I mean, if it's at a job, like, have a permanent mindset. Right. You might not be there permanently, but better things are going to happen if you're just planning on being there. Right. And so I know I've had many people ask me, like, where do you see yourself in 10 years? I see myself dying here in California, in the high desert with the Gate Church. That might not happen, but that's my plan. Yeah, that's the plan. And I would be totally cool with that. And people are like, why you live in the desert your whole life? Well, number one, I always make this joke. God's favorite people were always in the desert. That doesn't really apply here, but I love it here, and that stood out to me. What Pastor Jade was talking about is just having this permanent mindset of where you are. And then when we think about the church culture in our day and age and kind of what's going on is, when we join a local church, it's a covenantal bond that we have. And if we understand the covenant according to the scriptures and according to Jesus, like covenant is not something to take lightly.
Right.
Covenant is it's the greatest bond and connection you can have, and so you can't just break that.
Mm-hmm.
And when you join a local body, when you join a local church, you're joining in covenant, which means you should strip away the temporary mindset,
right.
and you should have that permanent mindset. And even in famine, because
mm-hmm.
even in famine, when things aren't going well, that's when you dig deeper.
Right.
And that's another thing that Pastor Jade said, is letting your roots go down deeper. So when you're in famine, if you put your roots down deeper, your roots are going to go down into the ground with the analogy, and they're going to reach water somewhere.
Right.
So, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I think what we see is today's culture is this microwave mentality. We want things now, and yes, there is excitement in a massive growing church. Or anything like that, but this microwave mentality, it's new and it needs to stop. We need to get over ourselves, and we need to lean more into the Lord's timing than our timing. This idea of temporary is what's got us into the trouble that we're into today. Drug addiction, it is a temporary relief of a much deeper issue. Divorce is a temporary relief of a much deeper issue. And because we have a fatherless generation, we have not had been modeled for us what it looks like to set a flag into a certain location and put our roots down. It's been, this isn't what I always thought it would be, so I'm just going to go see what else is out there. And so there's this hype that we see online, because on Instagram we're not seeing what's really going on behind that picture. We're not seeing the heart of that individual. On YouTube we see videos of awesome worship, explosive churches, massive churches, but we have no idea what's going on inside of there internally. We don't know what kind of issues, and I'm not downing any of those churches. I rejoice in what the Lord is genuinely doing there. We stand side by side with them. We are family. But again, a church pastor, I'm going to leave names out, but their church is massive globally. They are a huge voice from a worship perspective and from a pastoral perspective as well. And he said, what you guys see today is really the fruit of 30 years in the making behind the scenes of a core family sticking together through the trenches and praying for what you guys see today. And so that I take that mindset and I implement it here. And so it's all about being behind the scenes, being in the trenches, and at the end of the day, this is family. Mm-hmm. Again, if we really believe what we believe in the Bible, that we are a family, and you don't leave family. Mm-hmm. Some you might ignore, but at the end of the day, you don't leave them.
And we definitely ignore sometimes. Well, let me piggyback off of one thing you said, and just going to the Instagram, the YouTube, and all these things, because there always is more going on behind the scenes than what people want to put out there. I actually saw this video of, I posted it on Facebook if anybody wants to check it out some time back, and I forget the guy's name, but I think he's a psychologist or something. He talks about millennials. Mm-hmm. And so, but what he's talking about is he's had countless interactions with millennials who would do a job, and they'll work their job, and they'll be there 8 months, and they're thinking about quitting. And he's like, why? And they just say, well, I don't feel like I'm making an impact.
Right.
Which is this kind of abstract idea of something that they can't even define. And the problem is that we live in this microwave thing that we want things to happen right now, and we want things to be a certain way. We want to live in an Instagram world, but the reality is we don't live in an Instagram world. Like, things are messy, mm-hmm. and things take work. And that was the whole point of this video, is this guy said, we got kids being raised, getting participation ribbons for finishing in last, and We got teachers giving A's to students who don't deserve A's because they don't want to deal with the parents. And we just have all these issues. And so we're building this generation who doesn't really know how to work.
Right.
And they don't know how to get their hands dirty and actually feel a sense of accomplishment when actually they've put in the time and the work. So there's no
Right.
fulfillment. And this is not from a Christian study.
Right.
This is from the world. And they're talking about and it goes into a bunch of other things, the overstimulation of the brain from text messages and all these things, and how your brain releases chemicals that make you feel good when you get a text message.
Right.
Like, that's science, it's backed up. And they've become addicted to this feeling. And now when you're at work and things take a little longer and you have to put in some work and some effort, they don't get that feeling.
Right.
And so they quit and give up. And this is who we're dealing with. Like, this is millennials.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to have millennials step up and realize their errors, but we need someone to show them how to do it as
Right.
well. I'm a millennial. It's kind of funny. I'm kind of proud of it. And most people are like, "Oh, you're a millennial. You're not cool. You suck. Like, y'all got issues." And yeah, we do. Every generation had issues. Agreed. But like, we need leaders,
Right.
and we need people to stick to things. We need people's yeses to be yes and their no to be no, and to stick through things and to show us covenant.
Mm-hmm.
The fatherless generation, the divorce mentality we have in our world is an epidemic right now.
Right.
And we're just recycling things. And so the way millennials are is because we haven't seen any healthy example before. Now, granted, a lot of us have.
Sure.
I generalize, but obviously there's some specific examples. I think I'm a good example of, I saw a good work ethic, and I saw people who stuck to covenants and stuff. But overall, like, that is something that's lacking in the culture,
Right.
and now also in our churches. And granted, there's some awesome churches out there, like you said. I mean, even in the desert, like Assemblies of God, awesome church. Pastor John, awesome. Abundant Life, Pastor Mark, off the chain.
Yeah.
Awesome dude.
Absolutely.
But they understand that too. Like, we've had conversations with both of those pastors, and they get it. Like you in the famine, even though things might seem hard, you get your roots deeper,
Mm-hmm.
and you search for the water, and you'll see good things. And so, if I can keep evolving on this idea from Pastor Jade, verse 12 says that he sowed in that land, and he sowed into the famine. And then he also mentioned that in the same year he reaped 100-fold in the land of the famine. Isaac. So he stayed in the land that God told him to, and because he sowed in that land, he reaped 100-fold. And then the other thing is, as one of the statements Pastor Jade said, is he said, your situation does not dictate the promise, ability, and blessings of God. Like, mind explosion.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the more I give myself, the more we discover who God is to us.
Right.
So, anything?
Yeah, I like I said, we've entertained this idea. I thought of moving to New Zealand. I've thought of all of it. We've looked at all kinds of different locations that we could just go to and be comfortable. We've entertained the idea of just going completely off the grid, which we have full access to, and just being self-sustaining.
Yeah.
Which is certainly in this time of day is a very attractive idea.
Don't tell my dad.
But in all reality, that's not what we're called to, especially as Bible-believing Christians. And I am all for sowing into this community. I am all for sowing into our local church body here at the gate. And regardless of whatever it looks like in whatever season, whether we have tons and tons of people that are flooding through the doors and we have to split services, or we have a small congregation, I can function in either one, and either one is fine with me. I don't need all the hype. While those things are great, those
Yeah.
are not bad things. I just don't need it, and that's a lot of what we've been talking about in the Wednesday night Bible studies. Is that when we make a thing the thing, and we start worshiping creation rather than Creator, and our covenant is with things that are temporal rather than a covenant with the Father, the King of the universe. Then it kind of changes your perspective a little bit. And so then he also jumps back into the message. He talks about a harvest mentality, which is short term, and then he talks about an inheritance mentality.
Yes.
And that was probably the biggest thing, because in the charismatic circles, you hear about harvest all the time. It's, and the enemy's after your harvest is one of the key terms that he had used on Sunday. And he said, the enemy has no problem with you getting harvest.
Yeah.
It's if he can strip you away from your inheritance and understanding and comprehending what your inheritance is, which is another thing. We see the providential hand of God once again, because on Wednesday nights, that's another thing that we're going through in the book of Galatians, and just at the right time, perfect timing, we start stepping into the text and Paul talking about inheritance in who we are. And then Pastor Jade rolls this thing out. The dude's from Colorado Springs, has no idea what we're doing on Wednesdays.
Yeah.
And that's just affirmation for us that we do have to get and grasp this mentality of who we are as sons and daughters. And sons and daughters, we don't need to leave. This is family. And again, back to that statement that pastor had made, that do you have 30 years in you? I do. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. I don't plan on dying.
No.
That could happen, but I don't plan on it. And so I plan on being here. I want to see what happens. And so he also states this. He said, harvest is not bad, but needs to expand to covenant and inheritance. Harvest requires a seed. Inheritance requires a sacrifice. That was huge.
Yeah, that was huge.
Are you willing to sacrifice? Are you willing to be uncomfortable? Because sacrifice is messy.
Yeah.
If you look at old school biblical times, I don't picture the altar being perfectly clean and knit during these times of sacrifice. I just don't see it happening.
No.
And had the hammer come down, the knife come down in the scene with Abraham, I don't think that would have been very clean either.
No, definitely not. My mom, she lived back then. She'd be grabbing the bleach and trying to clean everything. But no, it was messy, man. Sacrifice was messy, and that point to me was like, my mind literally almost exploded. Is just inheritance requires sacrifice. Like, that's a huge concept.
And not only that, the requirements. If you study the Bible, what the requirements were for it to even be considered as a sacrifice, it was something that was to be prized.
Yeah.
It was something without blemish. It was something of perfection. And so take a look in your own life, and what are some things that you're really holding on to? Maybe it is career. Maybe, I don't know. I really don't. But when we take that and we implement it we take from the scriptures what sacrifice look like, and we make it practical and implement it into our own lives. What's that look like for us? And what are we holding on to? Are we holding on to a preference and what we think the church should look like? Are we holding on to that in such a higher regard than what's real that it actually disillusions us and it separates us from what's reality?
Yeah. There's so much to talk about in the sermon, dude. It was like crazy. Like, Pastor Jade, if you ever bless us and listen to this podcast, you're the man.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Absolutely.
Some other things that he stated: inheritance requires a lifestyle change. Power of harvest is in more seeds. The power in inheritance is that it transforms nations. Just remarkable.
Mic drop.
Yeah. Like, so good. This revelation he got so good. He talked about Isaac redigging some of his father's wells, but then also making new wells, and the names. We don't have to get into all of this, but just as a recap so you guys can remember and think about this. One well was named, I probably can't say it the right way, but Essek, which means contention or coral. When we dig wells, there could be corals, offenses, or contention. Sitna was another well that Isaac named, which is the root word is Satan, which is accuser. Ray, the space to be fruitful. That was another well that Isaac dug. And then Shabbat was another well that he dug, which you can find in verse 32, which means covenant. And so there's a whole sermon behind these. We can't get into all of it. It was such a rich sermon. It was the whole Sunday was awesome with the Benjamin offering and this and Pastor Jade sharing. Like, it was really awesome to be a part of it. If you haven't listened to the sermon, we have the live raw feed on the Gate Church of the High Desert's Facebook page. Also on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, we have an edited version. We didn't edit Pastor Jade, so we didn't cut anything out. So it's just the sermon, it's not the worship or anything else. But if you haven't listened to it, please